All the roads are windy.
Welcome to the show, Jacqui. It's finally happening. We've been kind of back and forth for literally years and just life and pandemic and stuff. And here we are now. So I'm really excited to finally be sitting here and just connecting.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It has been a while. A lot has happened.
To say the least.
It's an understatement.
Oh, wow. Well, we're very excited to talk. And before we begin, I'd love to hear, who are your ancestors? What lineages do you come from?
Yeah, I am mixed Yakima, Irish and Eastern European. So my maternal grandmother is Yakima, and she was born in so-called Washington, grew up on the Yakima Reservation, and then moved to, well, she moved around a bit, but moved to so-called Montana, which is Absolute land. And that's where I was born and grew up with the Yellowstone River and sagebrush and sandstone. And then my paternal grandma, her parents settled around the Great Lake region from, it was then called Czechoslovakia. And so I haven't traced like the exact specifics because there was a lot of like movement. And then, yeah, I also have some Irish from my paternal and maternal. But I'm blanking on the word grandfathers. They're a little bit, I connect more with my maternal lineages, as you can tell. Yeah.
Ah, thanks for sharing. And I love this question because you can't always tell where someone comes from just by looking at them. And pretty much every person I've asked, I'm like, wow, this is so cool to just see how, these different lineages come together and how like the world we're living in is so different from the world of our ancestors. And it's represented through this braiding of lineages. So yeah. And I know that's something that's really important to you. So I'm sure we'll be getting into that. But where do you live now and who are the people of that land?
I actually just moved. So I am a guest on Coast Salish territory, Nanaimo territory. So that's so-called kind of like Nanaimo area, just south of Nanaimo on so-called Vancouver Island. So that's where we are now. It's still really getting used to it. It's very fresh.
All right. I think that's a good place to jump in because, oof, everyone who's followed you on the gram has probably aware of your deep connection with the earth and growing medicines and with plants and animals. And, like you are very much in connection with the broader chorus of life and how that, not interacts not just with our physical body, but with the energetics and, coming from the kind of more middle of the continent and moving to the coast, I imagine that's really a big change. How is that landing for you? If you're okay talking about that, like, what are you noticing that's different? Does the land inform you differently now? Like, are you changed by the land you're on? I'd just love to know.
Yeah, I love this question so much because I've been reflecting on it quite a bit since being here, obviously. Just as you said, like being in a completely different environment, different land, different First Nations, different plants, different animals, different waterways. It's different climates. Like everything is completely, well, not completely different. There are similarities too, and that's been really beautiful, of course, to like reflect on and to see, plant kin that I'm like especially close with, like to see like elder budding, and it feels like, oh, like that like familiarity of like seeing family of like, okay, like I'm, because sometimes when you move, you can feel like a bit alone, I think, especially when you don't know anybody. And so, to see the plant kin kind of like budding and being helps me just, feel that sense of community and belonging. But yeah, it does, I think, definitely impact and inform our rhythms and our cycles, the way we're interacting with the world, with ourselves. It's just so different. As you were asking the question, a big eagle actually just came and landed right in front of the window, like where I'm sitting too. And then they just took off. So like even, like communing and sitting with eagle every day or with the ocean every day is yeah, very different. Very different. I feel very grateful and humbled. I didn't grow up by the ocean, so it's like all like, wow.
That's so cool. I grew up on the East Coast around water, and so it's very weird to not be around water. So it's so cool to think about someone who's the flip side of that, and like getting to know this beautiful being, the powerful being. What drew you to move to a completely different place?
Yeah. Well, so if you have followed along at all on Instagram, we were evicted quite suddenly from the medicine gardens. They have plans to demolish and build high rises, which is a whole other thing. And so we just didn't have a lot of time. And I'd been having dreams for maybe about a year and a half of eagle, of salmon, of picking salal berries and huckleberries. And I just really felt the land calling and the ocean calling, the plants. And it was interesting because growing up like in a high desert area, I don't know, I never really felt like a pull to the ocean. Like I'm much more of like a mountain and like river and like Great Lakes. But those dreams were just so strong. And I think, like sometimes this happens where the ancestors kind of just like put you on a path and you're like, really? And they're like, yeah, like go. And so I think, yeah, the eviction even partly was like, okay, like if you're not going to, make this decision, like, you need a little nudge. And so we kind of looked around and found a beautiful place that I felt would be nourishing for my family, for my little one, for my nervous system as well. And so we ended up here in the middle of winter, making a move across the country, driving.
Wow. And now as we're recording, it's just 2 days past the spring equinox, and I imagine the season, I mean, you're much further north than me, so I imagine it's maybe peaking. I don't know, what's happening around there? Can you give us a spring update?
I can give you a spring update. And so that part of like informing things too, right? Of like, there's daffodils blooming and snowdrops, and Oregon grape is blooming. It's really rainy here. But definitely warmer than what I am used to, right? Like the spring equinox for me usually, for the past 10 years has been snow, like, a lot of snow and like kind of like just those slight stirrings of spring. Whereas now, like it really does feel like early spring, like cherry blossoms are blooming. Magnolia is like almost opening. Elder is budding. So it's early spring.
Whole different rhythm, and that's so wild. I mean, I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it's a whole different I'm like, how are daffodils and roses blooming at the same time? Like, what's going on here? This is so weird, but it's really cool to experience that. So yeah. So coming from all of this, I'd love to take a little trip backwards and ask about when you were a kid. Were you always this connected to nature, or is this something that awakened for you at some point in your life?
I think it's a little bit of both. I definitely was always like very connected. So some of my earliest memories are of like sitting with a cottonwood tree, like before I was really like verbal, and speaking with the cottonwood tree, like hearing them having conversations, sharing just like they were like family or like a close friend. And also with the, like, as I mentioned, the sandstone and the sagebrush, like really felt like family. And they were. And so I would go to them and like talk and play and share. And then, I think getting a little bit older, I veered off of that path a little bit due to various reasons. Coming from a broken lineage, like I think there was maybe spoken, maybe unspoken, like, oh, like, you can't really talk to plants, or like, kind of feeling like a little bit weird or strange, being bullied in school, things like that. And so I don't know, I feel like it was a good decade. I really tried to fit in. And by fit in, like fit with some of the colonial like standards of like fitting in. And that's kind of where I veered off of my path a little bit. And my family would kind of like make jokes of like, oh, your first word was tree, because it was like my first word was tree. But like, I'd be like, no, like, and yet at the same time, like whenever like I was really feeling low or alone or questioning my path, I would go and sit with the water. So at that time, it was going to university on Lake Superior. So I would go and just sit with the water. And I think like coming out of that decade, it was maybe from like 13 to like, I don't know, 22 or something like that. I just heard the land. I heard the plants. I heard my ancestors kind of all like, they were like, just come back. Like you went too far. And I didn't know at the time, it was like just these little, it would be like dreams or like whispers, like hearing almost the plants and the land. And so that kind of reawoke that within me. And then of course there were various steps along the way that deepened it and affirmed and brought me back.
When that was awakening, what did that look like? You said there was dreams and things, but then as those steps kind of snowballed, perhaps, how did that incorporate into your life?
Well, it completely, and I say this like very lovingly, like completely demolished my life, like in the most like beautiful way possible. Everything, like I was in a relationship for that like decade essentially too. And I started kind of like dating the person when I was 14. We got married. Like it was a whole life that I had kind of like built, but not like really built, that I was just kind of a part of, like I don't know, like it felt like I was just kind of witnessing. And so as all of this kind of started to reawaken, that all had to completely go. Maybe it didn't, like it doesn't have to for everybody, but for my path, it had to shift. And so it didn't really fit. And I tried to find ways to make it fit, and it didn't ultimately. And so everything completely changed. In a big way.
I think a lot of people can resonate with that. And it's not like, there's these moments when I think the Tower card in tarot kind of represents that. It's like, okay, this big change is coming and it's going to break down everything, but it's not to punish you. It's because to break free. And that's what I'm hearing in your stories. Like this was, this unraveling to come back home. So when you did come back home to yourself, not literally physically home, but when you came back home to yourself in this way, I mean, it's, we're sitting here talking about it over a few seconds, few minutes, but of course, I'm imagining it was quite a journey of like time and space. And how did you know when you kind of landed? I feel like this is a weird question because it's kind of almost always unfolding for people probably, but like, was there a moment that you were like, I think this is it. I think I'm on the track?
Yes. Yeah, I think there were probably a few of those. It took a couple years, I think, of, I don't know, like trying to kind of figure it out. I was a makeup artist for a little bit.
Okay, let me just say that explains why you're so fucking good at makeup. I'm like, I want lessons. Okay, keep going.
Thank you. I do love it. I do. So yeah, I would say like one story that's really coming up that was probably like a little bit later, but one that kind of came up as you were asking. So I'll share. I was driving through kind of like the Bay Area, like a little bit further. It was like Nisenan territory. And I just got this sense of like that home within our bodies, like being home, like on earth. being home, like wherever the plants are, wherever the land is, wherever, like just like within myself, of like coming, like almost like coming, like as you said, like coming back into my body, like my spirit, kind of like finding that that rootedness. And that was like quite a bit, like quite far into kind of the path. And I'd been wandering for so long, kind of trying to like, I guess, find that that sense of home, you know, within myself, or that sense of like, okay, like I'm here. And it's a really, like, it just stands out. It's a really poignant moment of like, and I was just driving, like, just a beautiful day. And it just all of a sudden was just like, boom. And everything shifted from there again in a beautiful way.
Oh, what a beautiful experience, that knowing. Okay, take us through the steps from makeup artist to medicine maker.
Yeah, so I guess like I've been making medicine since I was a little one. So connected with the plants, the trees, and I would always like craft like potions, and I would be out in the bush and in the garden and like trying to get like my sister and brother to like drink these like potions that I made, or like going around to neighbors and trying to be like, hey, like look at what I made. And I was like way younger than everybody, so they were all kind of like, not into it. So then, yes, I was always into kind of like makeup as well, and that. And so I pursued that path, and I loved it. Like I find it really beautiful to play with like colors and textures, and to have like our outward expressions matching, what we're feeling from day to day and how that shifts. But I had, again, a dream. So I realized the dreams keep coming up often. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was just kind of like I think I was thinking at the time of like maybe going and getting like my MBA or something. I don't know. But I woke up and I was working for Mac at the time, and I was just like, I can't, this isn't right. This isn't my path. This isn't my like journey forward, as beautiful as it was. And I just like got up and started writing in a journal of like everything that I wanted my life to look like, everything that I wanted to feel, everything that I wanted to do. I'd already visited the naturopathic school a couple years prior, and decided like, no, that's not for me. Like, it's too much, too long. And after that dream and after writing everything down, I just, I knew that I had to do it. And I think for me at the time, I didn't really know like herbalist was even a thing. I'd never heard that term of herbalist. So I'd been, making teas for my family and potions and all of that kind of stuff, like throughout this whole time, even like as a makeup artist, but I didn't have that vocabulary, which seems so strange because it was, I don't know, maybe like 12 years ago or something like that. And so naturopathic medicine is what kind of spoke to me and called me. Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. Like people listening to this today are probably, we're so ingrained in today's world where everything has exploded. But 12 years ago, Instagram wasn't really a thing that it is today. And like the internet was still very rich, but it was not the same. I remember, being back then and being like, where are my other witchy weirdos at? And that's part of why a few years that you're speaking 12 years ago. And then like 6 years ago, I started my podcast, and it's like that, like back then it was like a different world. So it makes sense that, herbalist wasn't a thing. And like Instagram and all these different social media platforms have really validated it and spread that awareness, which I think is really cool that people can see that and be like, oh, this is a valid path that I can take and like help people and work with plants. And whereas before it's like, you're going to do that, good luck. Yeah. Okay. So you're like, I think it's so interesting too, that you had visited the naturopathic school a couple years prior and been like, nah. And that's like, sometimes these journeys just have these buffers and times where things have to emerge. Like, it's not just this one step to the next all the time. Like, that's it's just wild how sometimes we know, but it's just not the right time. And yeah. Okay, so you went to naturopathic school. Now you are Dr. Jacqui Wilkins. And yeah, emerging from that, how does that all come together to who you are, what you are doing today, how you offer your gifts and your medicine?
Yeah. So I think like part of that, was also not having like elders in my life. Like, again, as I mentioned, coming from a broken lineage, I spent so much time with my maternal grandmother. Like, she was the one who, would watch me like during the summers or like in the evenings, or so I spent, a lot of my time with her. And she didn't really speak a lot about, our stories or traditions. We would do crafts together, and things like that, but we just didn't she didn't share a lot. And so I think part of it was also like not having that modeled for me, like not knowing, I guess, that plant medicine was valid, kind of like you were saying, like things have been validated, or that, I can speak with the land or the trees, and that is part of my lineage. And that is part of, working with the plant medicines and working with the land. And that is part of healing and part of medicine. And so being in naturopathic school was a lot of this, a lot of like the ancestral healing. At times it was like difficult and like filled with some grief of, learning. And I had some really beautiful and amazing teachers as well. And there were still a lot of like colonial concepts and that kind of, teaching being in a institution. And so there was like some grief and anger and not always having the words for it, but just feeling it in my body, And so, yeah. It was a lot. It was beautiful. And I'm grateful for the education. But it itself was a lot as well.
So we've kind of touched on just, coming from a broken lineage and mending. There's more than enough, plenty mending to go around, And so what have been some of the more, fun parts of mending? I think mending and healing work can be heavy, but it's also can be really light and beautiful. So I'd love to hear that.
Yes. Yeah. I think just reconnecting always feels so sweet. Like I remember one particular potent journey to connect with ancestors. And I went to the stars and the star nations, and I just felt like their embrace and just felt like almost like them saying like, we've been waiting for you. Like, we're so happy, that you're here. And just like this loving embrace of like, just everyone, and it brought me to tears. And it's like that feeling of remembering and of belonging and of connection is really beautiful and really sweet. So that's one that's really held me. And then also like, certain like rituals, and, just remembering like those ways and knowing and feeling that my ancestors are like full of joy when I remember as well. Right. So like being out and like picking berries and like feeling nourished by the land. And then also like having my ancestors like almost like cheering, like, yeah, like, good job, you made it out today. And so that also is really sweet. And also witnessing those impacts on my little one and, seeing how that mending has translated into, his being, which is really sweet.
I love that. Just the ancestors loving, they're like, yes, great job. Thank you. Gold star. That's beautiful. Love to get into your creative process. I mean, just watching you on the gram, I'm like, how do you do everything you do and you aren't just a pile on the couch all day? Have a kid, have a business, writing these really freaking like just wholehearted Instagram posts and just like so much. I'm like, what's going on there? Take us behind the scenes.
It's so funny that you say that because I often feel like I am just a pile on the couch. And like even today, like doing my makeup, I'm like, I don't think I've gotten like ready, which I do actually enjoy, as we've discussed. But like put on like, bright colors. And I mean, it's been a couple weeks, since I've done that. So that's funny, how we are perceived and the reality of things as well. So I don't know, like, I find that when I have some alone time is usually when my creative process feels the most flowing. So I really, really love solitude, and I really love just time alone in my house. I love being like, in my home or garden or on the land by myself. And so I find that's usually when the creative process flows. Oftentimes it's after my little one goes to bed and when things are quiet, or sometimes I'll try to wake up early, before he gets up. But then he like kind of can feel me awake. So I'll be kind of in the middle of it. And then he's like, and then I'll hear like little like footsteps. I'm like, Mama, what are you doing in here? So I don't know. I don't know that I have like a specific flow or ritual other than just being alone, lighting some candles, calling in the fire element, maybe lighting some medicine, smudging, and just being and allowing myself to kind of, I guess, feel whatever it is I'm feeling and then following that. So kind of like checking in with myself of like, what's coming up for me right now? Like what's happening in my body or my spirit? And that usually, I guess, is where the words come from or where the inspiration comes from.
Something I love hearing this about different people and sharing that with our audience too, because it can look so different for different people, but maybe seeing someone else's reflection might help someone finally accept it in themselves. If it's similar, it's like, how do you hear plants speaking? Like when you're out there, do you feel them, sense them, hear them, like see, like what's happening in that inner world in your senses that you translate it into this different dimension than just I'm looking at a flower?
Yes, I love that. So my little one asks me often, and so it's been really sweet, to share that. And then of course I teach about this as well, with like intuitive, connecting and listening to the land and the plants. So for me, it definitely is like a sensing and a knowing. So it's just like I just hear it, but it's not like an auditory sound. It's just like that, like feeling. And then it's just there. And so sometimes it can also be like a sensation, like through like physical sensations, kind of like paired together. And then sometimes it's through dream time. So sometimes it'll come later, I'll be sitting with a plant and, be like, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. And then I hear nothing. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Maybe you're not ready. And that's okay. And then, later that evening or in a couple days, I'll have a dream with the plant, and kind of like learning a bit more about them and them sharing. And there's some pretty profound like teachings that can come that way without even, I'm just like, I love those moments where like you're even like in awe or like shocked by like, I can't believe that this just like really happened. And so those are really sweet moments to have those dreamtime teachings as well from the plants.
Do you dream journal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's changed. I feel like I'm talking a lot about my child and my mothering as his birthday is like next week. So that's the space that I'm in. So it's changed because I used to journal every morning, like every single morning. And now I don't have that same space. And so I still, I have I dream every night and tend to my dreams and love them. And so sometimes it'll be waking up in the middle of the night and writing like in my notes app, being like, oh, I can't forget this. And then reading in the morning and being like, what was that? Or it'll be just like maybe in the afternoon, if it's an especially potent one, I'll make time to write it down. But I would say that I really now only probably write down the ones that, leave you with that feeling of like, oh, wow, that was something, that was something I need to remember or sit with more or spend time with. And so I do still dream journal, but it's not a daily habit, even though I would like it to be.
Yeah. And I imagine that I love that you're reflecting on mothering. And how old is your child going to be?
6.
6. Okay. So 6 years now. And happy birthday, kiddo. Probably not listening to this, but still can send some happy birthday wishes. And gosh, I feel like I'm not a mother. I'm only a mother to my inner child and my fur babies. But I imagine that people who follow you and who, read what you write and, buy your courses, and like people who are interested in what you do. And I bet that they have some questions about how do you, motherhood and overlapping with running a business and like just being on your spiritual path. What question do you think they would ask you?
Oh, I have no idea.
Really? You don't get like a single, they aren't asking you like, how are you this and that with like, do they ask you about motherhood?
Not really. I feel like it's something I don't typically talk about it often. So
okay.
It's interesting that it's coming up right now. Because it's not something I share about that often. I think there's, especially during the pandemic, like it's been even more challenging, right? And the lack of support. So I think the thing that resonates with so many of us, whether, we have children or not, is like that sense of community and really needing more support, like more physical support. And so I think, sometimes I would get the question of like, yeah, how do you manage, like how do you structure your day, or how do you have energy or time for like the business, as well as writing and inspiration and cooking nourishing meals and tending to the garden and mothering. And so a lot of times, like I'll just bring him into it with me, and he's just a part of that rhythm and a part of that flow. And it's been really beautiful to witness, those relationships deepen for him. And like he went out and harvested some rosemary the other evening. And, like he'll ask like, oh, can I have like some tobacco to make an offering? Or like I said, gratitude to the plants and, things like that. And so I think even though it was done kind of out of necessity of like, these things have to get done, and he's also here with me, that it's been really beautiful to just incorporate him into the process and say like, we're bundling medicines today to send out to people, and, sharing with him like what we're doing. And yeah.
I love that. And I just can't help but see a future where people in our generation now who are having kids and who are incorporating them into just such a different lifestyle than maybe we were afforded and our parents were afforded and so on. Like, wow, that is so cool. Even if he doesn't end up doing anything close to related to plants, it's like he carries within him this understanding and connection from being with you in these years and getting to witness that and partake in that. And how cool is that for all these people who are getting to do that with their kids in different ways? And what is that going to look like in the next generation? That is so cool. So to be completely honest here, I mean, not like I'm not being honest, but just being clear here, I really don't know much about what a naturopath is or does. Maybe you can share a little bit.
Yeah. So I do get this question quite a bit. So, like, what is a naturopathic doctor? And so, a naturopathic doctor, so we are primary care physicians. So it depends a bit on like which like state or province you're in as to what our scope is. But you have to have like a pre-med degree, essentially, like an undergraduate, and then it's a 4-year medical program. So, like medical school, and you have like a doctorate at the end. And so our scope is varies a bit, but we are trained in traditional Chinese medicine, as well as plant medicine, homeopathy, and then of course like pharmaceuticals, chiropractic. We can run labs and interpret blood work. In some places, we can also diagnose. We can do minor surgery. We can also do PAP and gynecological exams. So we really are like, again, it depends where you are in the state, in the province, but like primary care physicians. And so it's a lot. And yeah, it depends. Like here in like so-called BC, we can actually prescribe pharmaceuticals, which can be sometimes needed and helpful.
Cool. Okay, thanks. I had no idea. That is so cool. And I'm thinking immediately, I'm like, I want to see a naturopathic person for my pap smears and everything. Like, oh, where are you? That's awesome. Like if someone focuses on that, maybe, that's really cool. Okay, what is your favorite part of naturopathic doctoring? Is that even like a phrase that is accurate?
I think it would be naturopathic medicine, like, or being a naturopathic doctor.
There you go. What's your favorite part of that?
That is a really good question. I really love traditional Chinese medicine. I feel like that is probably the modality combined with plant medicine that I would work with the most with patients. And then also I really love, I love the clues that we can receive from like blood work. So I really love, even though it may be very nerdy, I really love, I love blood work and combining that with like our cues from our body and also like, the spiritual aspect of healing and merging that together.
That's so cool. I mean, I totally get it because I come from a background of being a soil scientist. I love soil tests and like, what's the potassium? What's the balance with the calcium? Like, and it's because it's not just about the potassium. It's about how does it in relationship with all these others. And I'm remembering back now to seeing some chart. I think I was doing soil tests and then I had blood work and I was like, oh my God, they're so similar. I have no idea how to read the blood work one, but I'm like, this is really cool how it's all these interrelationships. And I mean, that is cool. That is really cool.
I love the interconnectedness, as you were saying, and also knowing like the pathways, right? Like, and how the plant medicines, because when we learn pharmacology, we're essentially learning like the physiology and the pharmacokinetics of the whatever it is, the substance. And so that can also apply to plant medicines. So understanding, how our bodies flow, which is just, I don't know, very cool.
I feel like that's so needed too, because you go to the doctor and they're like, just take this medicine, and you're like, okay, like, and also people don't realize herbs are so powerful. Like just because they're herbs and natural doesn't mean it's just like throw this herb in your body, it's gonna be okay. It's like the herbs can do so much. That's really like, we might have to have a whole nother conversation someday about all this. I love it. Tell me a little bit too about bridging the being a naturopathic doctor with, Indigenous medicine and worldviews, and just how, you mentioned that going to school, your naturopathic school had some really colonizer aspects. And I imagine that you don't bring those into what you do now so much. Like, tell us about that bridge a little bit.
Yeah, there's so much, of course, to it and to that topic. But like, even as you were saying, like, getting like a PAP by a naturopathic doctor. So, I think even just that aspect of bringing in that whole person, and by whole person, I mean spirit. I mean, like the body somatics, any trauma that the person may have experienced, their lineages, the ancestors, um, and kind of like bringing that in, and that spirit, I guess, aspect, whenever we're kind of like engaging, with one another. And I just recall in school, there were so many moments like this, but I was studying for like a botanical medicine exam. And I understand why we had to, like learn this way. And I'm appreciative, but I was like so angry. I think I threw a book, which like is really not me at all. Like I don't throw things ever. And especially like a book, because I love books. But I think it was some of that like ancestral, like just like rage of like they were just breaking all the plants down into like these constituents, and everything was so disconnected and so like use this plant for this, and just like extractive and exploitive and harmful. And I felt really frustrated because I was like trying to express it to maybe people around me. And like, they didn't really understand like why I was so upset. And I don't think I threw a book across the room. It was more like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. But they didn't quite understand like why I was like so upset. And it was like, the plants are, again, like, as I've mentioned, like our family, right? Like it's their whole like being, and they are important as they are just for being, not like for what they can do for us. And, like communing with them and sitting with their spirit. And so I started actually like a medicine garden in the first year of naturopathic school, because I heard the plants like, and ancestors, like, this is how you learn. This is how you learn, you tend to the land, you connect with the plants, in that way. And so that really helped me through school, is to have the medicine garden, to tend to while I was learning.
Yeah. And just being able to be in relationship with the plants, not just, like you said, extractive, like, how do we use you for our betterment so we can be more productive in our society? Like, oh.
Yeah, deepening those relationships, and the relationship we have like with one another as well, right? With the plants.
And like I can imagine too, just, I mean, I'm a gardener as well, and so like learning about that interconnectedness again, and just that's that mending. I think that word mending coming back and just reweaving science has, and the patriarchy and colonization and all of this has just been like, let's fragment into each individual part, and then in politics it looks like let's pit them against each other and fragment more. It's like this massive fragmenting, and how do we remember how we're all interconnected, and what does that actually look like? So just hearing your story and such a weaving of these worlds, it really, like, a story of mending is just the word of the day, I think, for me, coming up here witnessing your story. Thank you for sharing. It's really nice to get a little peek into kind of behind the scenes of Jacqui, because I love how richly you share in the moment and of speaking to the moment of what's happening. But there's so much I didn't know. And still so much more. But this is really beautiful to have this kind of snapshot of your journey. Yeah.
Word that came to mind as you were speaking.
Yeah.
The interconnectedness and the weaving and coming back. So in school, there was a word, anastomosis. So as, we're learning about the human body, and then tending to the land as well, there's, of course, like those like parallels, right? Of like, we are the land embodied, we are nature. And so we can see that through like the rivers and streams, as well as like our own, like, blood vessels. And so this word, anastomosis, is actually one of my favorite words. It's from anatomy, physiology. And it's where essentially we can say a stream blood flow kind of like goes off and like it breaks off and then it comes back and like rejoins the main, like kind of like the bloodstream. And so it's like this like wandering and yet weaving together and returning. And so that just felt really potent and nerdy, but beautiful.
I love it. Thank you. I love that. It feels it encompasses in one word, nerdy word, which I'm all a fan of. It encompasses, I feel like, the desire that so many people who resonate with us and what we're into probably feel is that balance of solitude and togetherness and having that flow. And that just feels like that river, that blood vessel break, or the blood flow breaking off and coming back. And it doesn't have to be all one or the other. Like, that's beautiful. And it's right there showing us in the body. Just boom. Yeah. Cool. Well, I just want to see, is there anything else that you want to share that we didn't touch on that you're just like, it's just wants to be spoken or witnessed?
No, I don't think so. Like, I think the mending, I love that. And the rhythms that we spoke about in the earlier part, has been coming up a lot of like, listening to our bodies and the rhythms of our own internal guide, and also the environment that we're in, and sort of flowing with those cycles and those rhythms that we find ourselves in, instead of, pushing to be anything else or to be productive or to be on. Yeah.
Perfect. Hopefully we can talk again sometime sooner than 2 years or 3 years, however long it's been since, because there's so much more I'd like to get into, but put a pin in it for now. And what do you offer and where can people find you?
Yes. Yeah. So I have a website, hellishmedicines.com. And so I make plant medicines, so all sorts of offerings, often seasonal flower essences. I love herbal elixirs, things of that nature. And then I also teach courses. So right now I have a grow your own medicine offering where we grow the plants and we grow 8 medicines together, and also learn how to, again, like kind of commune and speak with the plants in that way, and have those good relationships with the land and the plants, as well as harvest, preserve, and then make medicines. So it's a whole course of like building your, you're coming back to the land and building your home apothecary, so to speak.
And can you spell hellish medicines, please?
It is, I'm going to have to XALISH medicines.
Thank you. And of course, that's all in the show notes, y'all. And then, of course, if anyone listening doesn't know you on the gram, how can they find you there?
Yes, that is also a thing. So it's Among the Wildflowers. So among _ wildflowers. So like the Tom Petty song.
Excellent day. Yay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to come share a little bit of your story today. And I just really grateful to finally get to connect.
Yeah, thank you so much too. Yeah, it's been beautiful. And I hope we can delve into some of the plants and medicines and blood work.
Absolutely.
All the roads are windy.
Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app, and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.